Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us tonight. It's good to see some of our familiar faces and a lot of new ones as well, so thank you all for joining us. For those that don't know me already, I'm Pete Crane. I'm the Vice President of Education and Access here at the National World War II Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the National World War II Museum's commemorative program for Yom HaShoah. Tonight's program is generously sponsored by the Toby Philanthropies, which is part of our Toby Family Holocaust Education Program. In keeping with the museum's tradition, I'd like to start this evening by recognizing any World War II veterans, home front workers, and especially Holocaust survivors in our audience for joining us. So please stand or wave from your seats if you are one of those. I know we have two Holocaust survivors here, right down front. So let's give them. I'd also like to recognize any other veterans that we have with us tonight. So anyone else who has served in the forces at any point, if you would rise, wave your hands, be recognized. Thank you for your service and for joining us tonight. I don't see any offhand, but if any have snuck in, I'd like to recognize any of our former and current members of the Board of Trustees in attendance tonight or viewing online. Please stand or wave if there's any. I know we probably have a couple joining us online, so thank you for your dedication to the museum. And I know, because I've seen a number of them, we have some of our Patriot Circle and Charter members in the audience. Your ongoing support makes programs like this possible. So thank you for your continued commitment to the museum and especially to our educational mission. Thank you, Patriot Circle members. With the increase in anti-Semitism in recent years, now more than ever, it's critical that we share the experiences of those who survived the Holocaust. Through programs like this one and the construction of our capstone exhibition hall, the Liberation Pavilion, which will feature an exhibit on the Holocaust and will provide content regarding the immediate post-war years, the National World War II Museum is dedicated to educating current and future generations about the horrors of the Holocaust. This evening, we're grateful to have Toni Rinde with us to deliver our keynote address. Toni Rinde, Eagle, is a Holocaust survivor who lives in Largo, Florida with her husband, Dr. John Rinde. He is also a Holocaust survivor. They're the proud parents of 2 daughters and the grandparents of 4. And as a result of Toni's experiences in escaping from the Przemysl ghetto and then hiding in various places, she's committed to the concept of tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. She's the past president of the B'nai Israel Temple in Clearwater, Florida, and is also past president of the Jewish Federation of Florida's Gulf Coast. The Rendes were 2 of the co-founders, of the Florida Holocaust Museum. The Florida Holocaust Museum is the 3rd largest accredited Holocaust museum in the country. And they are older than this museum. They just celebrated their 30th anniversary. And Toni has sat on the board of that museum since its inception. Toni Rinde has received multiple awards and recognition for her volunteer work, including the International Kipnis Award from the Jewish Federation of Pinellas County and Pasco County. Toni and her husband John are the recipients of the Lebenberg Life Achievement Award from the Florida Holocaust Museum, and she also received the Woman of Valor Award from the Temple B'nai Israel in Clearwater, Florida. She's a frequent speaker, and particularly to school children about her experiences as a Holocaust survivor. She points out that things usually begin with words, progress to bullying, and then end up in tragedy. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome Toni Rinde to the stage for her presentation.
Thank you so much. It truly is an honor to be here to address you this evening. It's kind of difficult being surrounded by all this artillery, all these planes. It's sort of amazing. I'm very humbled to be standing beneath such an important museum and speaking in these hallowed halls. So thank you so much for inviting me to come. History unlearned is history repeated. Remember that. History unlearned is history repeated. Pre-World War II, population of Poland was 36 million people. Poland's Jewish population was 3 million. Przemysl, which is the city that I was born in, had a population of 60,000, of which about 30,000 were Jewish. World War II broke out on September 1st, 1939, my parents' wedding weekend. My father was an officer in the Polish army, and he was also a horseman. Someone came to the door of their place of their wedding and handed my dad his notice to mobilize. My dad went home, got his uniform, and left. That is the beginning of my life, or almost my life, as a child of a Holocaust survivor. Poland is partitioned between Germany and Russia. Germany went very quickly through Poland, and they went into the western part of Poland. I think I have a... They went into the western part of Poland, and Russia remained in the eastern part of Poland. During the time of the Russian occupation of the eastern part of Poland, the Jews didn't have the worst of times. They were able to get around, they were able to have a relatively normal life. But that didn't last very long. In 1941, June of 1941, the Germans reoccupied Poland, and this time also the eastern part of Poland. Shortly after they occupied that part of the country, ghettos were established, and there was a major ghetto in Przemysl. The Przemysl ghetto was large. Many Jewish people lived in Przemysl, and we all had to be herded into the ghetto. Sanitation became a major problem. Food became a major problem. Health turned out to be very, very difficult. My dad, who was one of these people that talked to a wall and the wall answered him back, became involved with the commando of the Przemysl ghetto. His name was Schwamberger. He taught him and his wife horseback riding. So the wife was a delightful lady and was able to bring my dad food when she can sneak it past her husband. But the husband was one of these people that when he saw a woman with a little baby, he would grab the baby, throw it up in the air, and shoot the baby. That was called Schwamberger. One day when they were riding, my dad was with Mrs. Schwamberger. She said to him that she had heard rumors that there's going to be a major uprising, a major action in the concentration camp. They were going to be bringing a large part of the Jewish population to the train stations and for Auschwitz. My dad taught horseback riding, but he also worked for a Lieutenant Albert Battelle in the Wehrmacht. My dad was in charge of food distribution for the ghetto. and he became quite friendly with this Battelle, who helped quite a bit. My dad spoke to Battelle and said, listen, this is what I heard. There's going to be a major uprising. My family is here. Can you help us? At that point, it was myself in the ghetto, my parents, my father's younger brother, and my grandfather. And Battelle said, let me see what I can do. Battelle rounded together a number of trucks and started heading those trucks towards the ghetto. The Gestapo tried stopping those trucks, and Battelle said, no, I am going through to the ghetto. Battelle, of course, paid dearly for that decision. No one goes against the Gestapo, certainly not someone in the Wehrmacht, which is below the Gestapo. Those trucks went into the ghetto. They rounded up 100 Jews. Our family and myself were one of those, pulled them out of the ghetto, and dispersed those people through the city of Przemysl. My family and I went into the cellar of the Wehrmacht. We were in the cellar, the basement of the army headquarters. We stayed there for several days until things quieted down. When things quieted down, the people that were dispersed in the city were then brought back into the ghetto. And we did fairly well at that point. One little quip, Battelle was an amazing German man who every day when we were hidden in the basement of the Wehrmacht used to bring a tangerine for me. He would say, babies need fruit, and every day I would have a tangerine when we were there. Long story short, after my dad and the rest of the family came back into the ghetto, my father realized that we need to make plans to leave because things are not going to be getting any better. Once the big action's starting to occur, one was going to happen, days later another, so on and so forth, until the entire ghetto was cleaned out. So my dad made arrangements through people that used to work for my grandfather for us to go and hide in their attics and in their basements on their property, on farms that they had. So we essentially went to live in these farmers' attics and basements and any place else that they could hide a group of Jewish people. We left, and things were not that terrific. As a matter of fact, one night, a rumor had it that this one family was hiding Jews. And the family was brought to church. And in front of the church, the family was questioned. And of course, we're not hiding Jews. We can't. It's against the law. We're not allowed to hide Jews. Long story short, the man was beaten for 6 weeks, brutally, and then hung, and his wife was also tortured at the same time, and they would not give away the fact that indeed they were hiding Jews. At that point, my father realized that trying to hide with a little baby was going to be very, very difficult. So he made connections to have me given to a lady in town. That was my Aunt Konoysna, who took care of me. I was known as her little niece that she was watching while her parents, the niece's parents, were sent to a different city to work for the Germans to help the war effort. I had to have a name that was changed. A birth certificate, a false one, of course, was given to me. I had to learn Catholic prayers. I had to learn catechism. Przemysl was a Catholic archdiocese, so we went to church several times a week. I was not allowed to play with anyone. I always had to be in the house. I was allowed to have one friend who lived across the street from me, who was a little bit older than I was. And believe it or not, about 2 years ago, I found out that it was her father who worked within the archdiocese had my false birth certificate made. That I found out about 2 years ago. But that's another story. If you want to hear that, you'll have to come to Florida to listen to me. I lived with my Aunt Konoysna while my parents left their hiding places, and they became part of a partisan group in the woods. My grandfather died in the meantime while this was going on. He was buried in the woods, and his body was excavated after the war, and they are both, my grandparents are buried in a tomb in cemetery in Przemysl. Sorry. The war ended. My parents came to pick me up. Well, that's great. Who are these people? They're coming to the door. Why are they bothering me? What do they want from me? I don't want to go with them. I'm perfectly happy living with my Aunt Konoysna. Needless to say, that's not how things turned out. It took a little time, but my parents finally convinced me that I have to go with them, whether I want to or not. In those days, you were told what to do and you did it. You didn't ask too many questions. You just did what you were told, right? So it took about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a few weeks longer, for me to accept my parents as who they were, or who they told me that they were, and that I was going to go with them. It was time to move on. So from Przemysl, we went to another city a little further north called Katowice. There my dad became very involved in whatever was left of the Jewish community. His main job was to write false birth certificates to Jewish orphans to let them go into Palestine. They needed birth certificates, they needed forms of identification, they needed to be able to at least handle themselves when they got to Palestine. That was another major issue once they got there. Different story. My dad, the authorities obviously found out what my father was doing. One night in our apartment at the front door, there was a note: either you leave Katowice, Poland, in 24 hours, or you and your family will be killed. Well, you kind of tend to believe when somebody tells you that you're going to be killed, especially after what they had been through. We left Katowice. From there, we went to Prague. My mother became quite ill, so we were living in a hotel called Naslupi, and there's another little cute story with that. We were living in the hotel, and next door to this hotel was a botanical garden. I always loved flowers, so for me, that was a wonderful thing. Here I'm right next door to this wonderful botanical garden. I can go there and just walk around, which is what I did every single day. Since I didn't have any friends, we had just come from Poland, there was a guard that stood by the entrance of the botanical garden, and he befriended me, this cute little girl. Let me talk to her, right? And I was delighted because I was able to have a friend. I was able to talk to someone besides my parents who really didn't have the easiest time getting used to me, getting used to living a normal life or a life of some sort of normalcy. So I was delighted. I made friends with this guard at the door. And one day the guard starts talking to me. And what do you do? And I asked me if I go to school, and I said, no, I don't go to school. And what does your father do? My father, oh, I don't know, he works. And does anybody else live with you? And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, my uncle lives with me, with us. So he said, your uncle lives with you, and what does he do? I said, oh, my uncle, he sells cigarettes on the black market. I just told the truth, right? Well, that little truth, the next day the police are in my parents' hotel room, and my Uncle Martin is arrested. Okay? So you see, kids talk. You have to be careful. My uncle, after a few days, was taken out of jail and everything was doing okay. My mother was not well. She had to be hospitalized. Her physician was a Jewish lady, a Dr. Skamana. I remember that like it was yesterday. Who was a wonderful, wonderful lady. After my mother recovered, she wanted us to move into her house with her, so we did. We moved into Dr. Skamana's house and lived there for a little while, always keeping our eyes and ears opened when the next quota will be allowed to come to the United States. We heard that there was an opening of a quota in France. Packed our suitcases, left to Paris. By the time we got to Paris, of course, that quota closed. So there we go again. Now what do you do? So life was established in some fashion again in Paris. The Jewish Federation, the Joint, was extremely helpful to us at that time. And I guess that's why I am so involved in that part of my life. And we lived for a few months and got word that there was an opening of quota in Holland, in Amsterdam. We moved. We went to Amsterdam very quickly again, and this time we were lucky enough to be able to get on that quota list to come to this country. My uncle, who got caught in New York during a medical convention right as the war broke out, was living in Manhattan in those days, and he was able to help us because you couldn't just come to this country. You needed an affidavit. You needed someone to say to the government that these people are not going to become wards of the state. They're going to be taken care of. They're not going to become a burden. My uncle was the one that signed that affidavit for us. We were very, very lucky. We lived in New York for a little while. I started school. I was just about 7 years old. We came here in September 1947. I turned 7 in November. Well, I've never had any education. You have to go to school. I didn't know how to read. I didn't know how to write, and certainly didn't speak English. What do you do? So my parents sent me to a Hebrew day school. It was the Manhattan Day School in New York. So not only did I have to learn how to write and read English, I had to learn how to write and read Hebrew as well. Well, that was a big job. But at the end of my first year, I went from kindergarten to first grade to second grade, and at the end of that first year in second grade, I received the top award, top student in both Hebrew and English in the school. So I did okay. We stayed in New York for a little while. We came to this country on an agricultural visa, agricultural quota, which meant that we have to come and settle on a farm. We moved to New Jersey from New York. My dad bought a farm and started farming. And of course, I went to school again, right? And I made friends with this little girl. I went to public school. Everything was wonderful. And one day I get on the school bus and get dropped off with my friend. She goes to Catholic school, and I go to my public school. And she turns around to me and she says, "You know, Jews, they stink. Pew." Well, why? I've never heard that before. That never affected me. I came home very upset and told my parents what happened. Well, the next day I was taken out of public school and I was put directly into another private school, Hebrew English, a yeshiva. Okay? I stayed there for a little while, graduated that, went back to public school, went to high school, lived a fairly complicated life. My parents, we did not live in a city. We lived in a farming area, so I didn't have many friends. I sort of did whatever I could. I had a brother who I helped take care of at one point. I decided that I have to start doing things on my own, which I did. went to high school, uh, made friends, and continued on with my life. Now, getting back to a normal semblance of life with my parents was difficult. My parents had to learn how to be parents, and I had to learn how to be a child. None of that was easy. But you know what? You do what you have to in life, and things work out for the best. And needless to say, it was all good. And here I am today speaking to all you wonderful people. And I think I sort of covered a good part of my story, of my life, left out a lot of stuff, but that's okay. And I'm open for questions, if anybody has any. Maggie? Yes. Yes. Well, my father was in the army, and after the Germans came in, there were no Jews allowed in the army, so he was in the ghetto with all of us. My dad was instrumental in saving everybody that was there, plus other members of his family as well. Yes.
Poland to see the cities that you mentioned, where you were born and where you moved. Could you hear me?
You know, I did a very bad job. I was supposed to show you pictures, which I didn't do. I apologize.
Where are the
Technically challenged. I was born right now. It's very difficult to show you because the way the country is. Do you see where it says Lvov, L-V-O-V? Okay, that city is very close to the border right now of Ukraine, okay? So I was born on that line. That's where the demarcation of Poland took place. So Przemysl was right at that point. If you hear in the news now, many of the Ukrainians go directly to Przemysl, and they are being helped by the Polish people. That's my father with his mother in the military uniform when right after he got married and then went into the service. This was Lieutenant Battelle. I guess I didn't talk enough about Lieutenant Battelle. Lieutenant Battelle was really my Schindler, because if it wasn't for him, I would not be standing in front of you right now and telling you my life. He was extremely righteous Gentile. He was above and beyond. He liked my dad, so he helped. This is me with the lady that I was living with, my Aunt Konoysna. Wonderful woman. And that's me. And that's me too. Yes. Sorry.
What happened to Lieutenant Battelle? You said he did not do well? Or
No, he did not do well. Lieutenant Battelle was arrested because you do not, under any circumstances, go against the Gestapo. The Gestapo told you what to do and you did it. Now, this is a historical fact. If you Google Albert Battelle, you will see what this man did. It was unheard of. He stopped his entire regiment of trucks and crossed the river where the ghetto was. And the Gestapo was standing at the other end and said, "You're not coming." And he said, "Yes, I am." And he went. Lieutenant Battelle was arrested later on and sent off to the Siberian front, what have you. And I don't really know what happened to him. I know that he was demoted and kicked out of the military, and they couldn't do too much right away because people would be looking for him. People knew who he was. You had to account for someone. But he was an amazing man, and as I said, if you Google Battelle, you'll see what an amazing individual this was. It is a historical fact that is written in our history books about Albert Battelle.
In the introduction, they mentioned that you speak to children now. I'm interested in how many of them actually know about the Holocaust, and also your feelings about, will the Holocaust and understanding of it move on as years go by?
Okay, how many children actually know about the Holocaust? The answer is not enough. And the sad thing is, it's not only children that don't know about the Holocaust, but there are a lot of adults that don't know that either. So we have a lot of educating to do across the board for everybody. And you asked whether the Holocaust can occur again? Is that what you asked?
I'm interested in, as time goes by, and now we have, the war in the Ukraine and everything, will the understanding of what happened in the Holocaust spread to what we need to know as human beings going forward?
So my opening statement was, history unlearned is history repeated. We are going through today what was unlearned by the world, because the parallels of 1935, 38, 39, and today in Ukraine and Russia are amazing. Amazing. So teaching has to go on constantly. That is the only way we can try to get people to understand and try to connect to someone. We use the word upstander. It's a word that's been coined ever since Holocaust education first came out, probably past 30 or so years. You have to be an upstander. You see something wrong being done, do something about it. Don't wait until you can't afford or can't change it. Make it stop when it happens. That's the only way. We have to teach. We have to teach. And it's very difficult because you have to be taught to hate. It doesn't happen naturally. You have to be taught.
So we have a question from YouTube. Can you elaborate a little more on how your parents survived as partisans in the woods?
I can't tell you an awful lot because my parents, as many, many other Holocaust survivors, really didn't like to talk to me about the Holocaust at all. That was not anything that we ever talked about. And as far as they were concerned, I was really not a Holocaust survivor. I was a child. What do I know? But they realized that kids do know, they understand. Maybe they don't understand in the same fashion that an adult can understand, but kids do understand. So they didn't speak to me about the Holocaust. So to tell you how they survived, it wasn't easy. Nothing can be easy being partisans in the woods. My parents were young people. Think about it. My mother was in her early 20s. My father was in his mid-20s. And they were thrown into this catastrophe. And on top of all of that, they had a child. What do you do with that child? Well, that was solved. And how do you survive? They had a father. My grandfather was with them for a while. He passed away. But what do you do? How do you manage to survive in the woods when it's 0 degrees outside and snowing? How do you get through a night like that? You do what you have to. You survive.
Where is the
I'm sorry.
Did your father ever consider taking the family to Palestine instead of the United States?
I want to say yes. The problem is we came to this country in 1947. Israel did not become a country until 1948. There were a lot of battling issues that were going on in those days. He just left the Holocaust. Do you look for another place that could cause heartache and pain again. No, you look for safety. You look for America. That was the golden country. This is all going to be great once we come to America, right? And you know what? And it is great. And we're lucky and have to remember that.
Where is that Holocaust Museum in Florida?
I'm so glad you asked. We are in St. Petersburg, Florida. It's on the West Coast. We are very easily accessible. There's an airport very close to us, and we're absolutely wonderful. So make a promise to me that you'll all come visit us. It's very important. Got it.
I actually have two questions.
Yes.
First, did you have any more contact with the lady that you lived with as your aunt, that was your aunt, afterwards? And then the second question is, did your father, your family have any farming experience to become a farmer in New Jersey?
Okay, so the first question, did we have any contact? We tried several times. Poland was under communist rule in those days, right after the war. So letters were sent and money was sent, and we always try to contact her and find out whether she received anything. And the answer was no, never got anything, never got anything. So it was impossible. With a communist regime, you can send money, you can send food packages, they were all confiscated. So nothing ever came to her. And your second question, I'm sorry?
Did your family have any farming experience to become a farmer in New Jersey?
Okay, so my grandfather was a large property owner in Poland, and he had a large farm, cattle and wheat and agriculture. When my dad came to New Jersey, he became a chicken farmer. But you know what? In life, you do what needs to be done, and you make things work. And that's all that amounts to. You have to be willing. If you're willing, it'll happen. Yes. How did I meet my husband? Wow. Well, our parents were friends in Przemysl. Okay, so was it an arranged marriage? Not really, but kind of, sort of, you know. My husband also survived totally different conditions than mine. He and his family got false papers. They became Catholics, and they moved to another city. And that's a whole different story. You really have to come to the Florida Holocaust Museum.
I'm just curious, how did your classmates receive you when you didn't speak English and you were thrust into that classroom setting?
Terribly. Kids can be very cruel. I didn't speak English. My hair wasn't the way they were wearing their hair. My clothes certainly were not. And kids are very cruel. So I had a terrible time. I had a very difficult time in class. And when I came home and tried to explain that to my parents, my dad said, ridiculous. This is what you have to do. This is what you have to learn. And that's the end of it. There's no discussion. So I did what I was told to do. It was rough. My childhood was difficult, very difficult. But I survived.
Yep. So your opening statement about history unlearned, were you as surprised as I was and many people that Putin's explanation for invading Ukraine was because of the Nazis? So do you think over the past 30, 40 years, Russian schools have taught something other than what we know Nazis to have been?
I have no idea. I don't know that we ever know or trust what comes out of Russia, whether they're telling us the truth or whether it's propaganda. So I can't answer that question because I just don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I hope that they learned, because there are people that have gone out of Russia, visited other countries, and they come back, but they're also not allowed to say much. You know, you talk against the state, that's a very expensive punishment. So I don't know. I just don't know. I hope that some of our feelings and democracy, the way we know it, gets into the Soviet Union. All we can do is hope.
When you were with your aunt, I'm over here. Did you know that you had parents that were somewhere in the world, or did you think that this was your aunt and this was your life?
This was my aunt, and this was my life. You know, I was 2 years old, and in the beginning, apparently, I had a very hard time. When I went to live with my aunt, I was sick, I was malnourished, lots of problems, and that's why my parents had to give me up, essentially, because you can't hide very well with a 2-year-old child. Children need to be fed, they cry. When you're trying to hide, you can't have a crying child. So that was my life, and she was good to me. And as I said, when these people came to the door and wanted to pick me up, who are they? And that took a long time to clarify. You know, I was 4.5 years old, and I was a pretty sharp kid. How do you explain that to a child? Think about that. You're not dealing with an infant anymore, you're dealing with feelings. And in those days, kids grew up very quickly, very quickly. So it was hard. It was hard. Life was not easy. Not at all.
So we have a question from Vimeo. My grandparents were chicken farmers in Toms River, New Jersey. Where were you in New Jersey?
You'll know of Vineland, New Jersey, okay? And I was really not in Vineland. Vineland was the big city. That's where I went to high school. That was the big city. So we lived in Estelle Manor, New Jersey, which was a small town, a suburb of Vineland, New Jersey.
You said that you had to learn Catholic prayers and you went to Mass with your aunt. Was it difficult to then embrace Judaism after that?
I want to say no, only because when I learned the Catholic prayers, I don't know that I attached God to those words that I said. Just as when I learned the Hebrew prayers, when I started learning Hebrew school, did I attach God to that? I think that comes a little later on when you become a little older, a little more mature, and understand what life is all about, and that there is something else beyond us sitting here and talking. So I don't think it was a difficult situation for me, no.
So for our final question of the evening, we're back here in the back.
You mentioned a brother. Obviously, he was younger than you and didn't have the same experience. How did that, as you grew up together later, how did that affect your relationship as siblings and even into adulthood with a passion that you obviously have? Does he understand your passion, share it? Could you just elaborate as much as you're comfortable with?
Of course. First of all, my brother was born in this country, so he did not share the same type of experience. I think he understands my passion only because we grew up in the same household. My parents were passionate about the subject. Once they became a little comfortable talking about their general experiences of the Holocaust, that's how we were raised. We knew nothing else at home. It was the Holocaust. This is how you grew up. We didn't quite understand the Holocaust. It was a word. But I think the way my parents acted and reacted, I think every Holocaust survivor has an issue that has to be dealt with. So I think he understands the passion because of his upbringing. And he's quite sensitive to me. We've cried together.
That is it for our Q&A for tonight. Let's give Toni a round of applause.
Thank you.
Kind of amazing in that she said thank you to us. Thank you, Toni. Thank you for joining us this evening and sharing your inspirational story, and for giving us the charge not to forget the atrocities that were committed in World War II and the Holocaust, and also the lesson of applying that to today, which, as you so eloquently said, is always a challenge, that it can always come back. Before we close, I'd like to again thank the Toby Philanthropies for sponsoring tonight's program and part of our Toby Family Holocaust Education program. Thanks to all of you for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again soon here at the National World War II Museum.